Hello, and welcome to the Wizard's Respite Sanctorum, your go-to spot for all things tabletop role-playing. Today we are diving into a topic as old as time, love. That's right, we're talking about love, flirting, and romance at the game table. Whether you're a bard or an NPC trying to awkwardly convince your party or enemies to lay down their arms, we got you covered this episode. We're doing a little bit of romance, a little bit of how to handle awkward moments at the game table, and we'll see where things go. This is a very special Valentine's episode, so tune in and see if we can get you some advice on how to introduce these strange and romantic topics at your table. But as always, I'm not alone. Today I am always joined with my co-host, Zachariah from Old Man Gaming. Zach.
Me and Wiz are finally going to kiss in this episode. Hi, everybody. Zachariah from Old Man Gaming. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about love. This is one of my favorite topics in general, let alone in role-playing games. So happy Valentine's Day out there, everybody. And to you people out there who are like, it's a Hallmark holiday, who cares? All the holidays are Hallmarks. It's a holiday about celebrating love. I'm down.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you celebrate any holiday, you might as well celebrate the one that is about, love and romance and your partner and all of the gushy stuff.
And if you're like, oh, I'm single and I don't have anybody to go on a date with, find something you love and just dedicate the day to that.
Exactly. I mean, dedicated to TTRPGs, to your favorite game. Who the hell cares?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you're listening to this, you must love TTRPGs. There's no other way. There's no other explanation.
That's absolutely right. So today we're obviously talking about love at the game table, which is, a bit of an awkward topic at times. It doesn't have to be, but it can be, and it definitely needs to be something that I think every DM and player needs to kind of think about before approaching this topic, at least a little bit, because everybody's got a different idea as to what is going to be okay at the game table.
Yes,
and nobody talks. We are living in an era where conversation is so hard.
I don't even want to get into that topic, but you end up with a situation where like everybody's down to game master and excited to play role-playing games until you have to flirt with your friend at a table. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, what have I done? And I think that this is going to be a good conversation for that.
I do. I think that there's a lot that people end up walking into when they try to approach flirting with an NPC or another player's PC or
well, should we start there? Just flirting with NPCs and players? There's so many topics on this to cover. I didn't know where to begin.
There are. It's a myriad of topics. But yeah, let's start with the basics, all the way to the very beginning. Let's go at it from the DM, because the DM starts it all. You don't have a game if you don't have a DM, you're a GM.
Yeah.
So as a GM or a DM from their perspective, let's talk about how you approach the idea, very start of flirting with a player through an NPC, not a player, but a PC, your character flirting with another character. Any initial thoughts before we dive into it, Zach? I don't want to...
Well, I do want to say, remember, you are the game master. You are control. You are in as much of control as of the situation as anybody else at the table could possibly be. So there are stories that you can run and plots you can run if you'd like to avoid that topic. If you like to avoid that situation altogether, if you want to keep your game about a dungeon crawl or keep your game about something else, you can always avoid it. It's not... I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. Personally, I'm going to give the benefits as to why you should always try and do romance and love in your games, in my personal opinion. But I also don't think that there's anything wrong with setting up a game where we're not necessarily going to do it, or necessarily we're going to be over here. I think the big issue with this kind of topic for all the things that we're going to talk about is communication. I think that, like, so often you end up at a table and nobody has had the discussion until all of a sudden your game master's flirting with you, and maybe that doesn't make you feel comfortable. Or maybe you're flirting with one of the NPCs, and that doesn't make the game master feel comfortable. I think in the process of character creation, or somewhere around that, you should just ask the game master, like, hey man, hey man or lady, how do you handle flirting and love and romance in this game, just so that I know what we're in for. Because some game masters might just be like, hey, we'll just do an overview of what you say. Other game masters are going to want to role play it out with you, and I think that a good game master will listen to you and what you're comfortable with, and what's appropriate to you, and then do that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get something straight out of the way. I think, like, you 100% hit it on the head right there. Communication up front and clarity is key.
Yeah.
I think, moving forward through this conversation, we should just make that the clear foundation before we go through tips, because that is 100%. I 100% agree with you, Zach. Everything else, like, needs to build off of that clarity initially founded by the game master, because, again, like you said, the game master is kind of the guy who's the most control over the game. He presents the world, or she presents the world, so they need to establish that baseline right off the bat if it's going to be involved at all. I think sometimes you don't necessarily need to really talk about it if it's stupid obvious, Well, you could even just throw a mention in, but...
And if you're playing a private game, chances are you're playing with really good friends that you've known for a really long time. That's usually how these kind of games come up. Like with Philbilly, I know what he feels comfortable with in a game, so I try not to go beyond that, because I just know Philbilly. I've been playing with him a long time. But we do live in kind of an age of, like, people jumping in other people's actual plays, a lot of, like, stuff being ran on the internet or for podcasts and through Discords with people that they don't necessarily know. We have, like, that communication nowadays. So I think that, as silly as it sounds, I think that it's a good idea as a player coming into a game with a bunch of people you don't know, maybe even a game master you don't know, just to ask the questions. I think a good game master is going to be like, hey, here's how I usually run situations like that,
Absolutely, yeah. So, foundation, talk about it. Just mention it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, what you would mention, like the sort of the fundamental things you would say as a GM, or fundamental things you would ask as a player of your GM when you're trying to approach this topic at the game table. There's a couple of different, like, golden rules that, like, first off, obviously be respectful of everybody at the game table. Approach it as an adult. Even if you're, like, a teenager right now, approach this as an adult.
Yeah.
Everybody should be able to walk into this, and this is one of the reasons why, like, I think that this is this is one of my favorite things about RPGs, is you are talking to other human beings. You are facing them, or you're talking to them on Discord, you're having a conversation. This is a great way to push yourself outside of what maybe is your comfort level in regards to just having an adult conversation. And you're going to have tough, awkward, weird conversations. Maybe you're not a person that has a problem talking about romance at all. Maybe you are. But this is a great way to just open this up and start the conversation, like, with, hey, let's talk about it. And then from there, do you have any tips as to, what you would say as a GM to your table, Zach, or if you're going to bring a conversation?
I mean, obviously communication is key, like we said in the beginning. I do want to just one more time say that a lot of people make fun of a lot of the modern There's like, especially with World of Darkness, there's a whole section on like having an X card, or playing these things when you're uncomfortable, and a lot of the seasoned role players make fun of those things because in practice it's a little silly. If you're playing an X card because you're uncomfortable, everybody at the table is going to see you're playing an X card because you're uncomfortable, so why wouldn't you just say I'm uncomfortable? But at the end of the day, that's still the practice. I think the practice behind it is good. Role-playing games are supposed to be fun. They are a game. They're recreational. We hammer this home on this week every time. If something comes up that's not comfortable for you, that's not fun for you. You shouldn't be doing it. Like, this is a recreational thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's just that simple. So I think key for me would be trying to figure out my players, trying to figure out what they are comfortable and what they aren't comfortable with. Like, I've had players who will describe physical acts they do to each other during the flirtation, like kissing or touching each other. I've had players who are much more like, kind of want a general overview of what is happening between the two characters and then are done. Like, that all sounds sexual. I didn't mean any of that to sound sexual, but I guess it's like, I've had characters who, like, I want to kiss her deeply and passionately, and then I've had players who are like, we go do stuff. Like, if she's down, we go do stuff. Those are the kind of differences. Like what are you comfortable with? Me personally. And I'm just going to say this about myself, and this is not a judgment on anybody else. Personally, I have always been of the mind that anything you're not willing to talk about is the thing that is going to give other people power over you and allow them to, either make fun of you or cause you pain. I learned that in high school when I got picked on a lot. So
Yeah.
So one day I just started talking about anything anybody would ask me, period. Like, doesn't matter. Body parts, anything. I'll just talk about it. I don't care. And that's how I am now. I'll talk about anything, whether it be sexual in nature or not. Of course, respecting other people's wishes. But, like, to me, none of this stuff bothers me. It doesn't bother me. I'm very confident in who I am as a person. So, like, me flirting with another guy doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that somebody should be... I'm not saying that's an insult on anybody who gets upset if a guy's flirting with them or doesn't want that or doesn't feel comfortable with that. I'm just saying it doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. So I'm completely good to flirt, but I think it should be up to the players. Like, what do they want and what are they comfortable with? Because, again, you're facilitating a recreational game for... Like, if you were playing a video game and something got uncomfortable for you, you turn the video game off. You can't really do that when you're sitting in a garage or a basement with a bunch of other people. So if something gets uncomfortable for you, it's going to be a very awkward and embarrassing situation. So if you're a game master, I think really get to know your people, understand what they're willing to do, kind of their limits, and where they'd kind of like to cut it off at. I do want to say, from a strategic standpoint on game mastering, if you don't mind me vamping for just a couple more minutes,
Sure.
The benefits of having love as a game master or romance are huge, regardless of the level of the flirting or the discussion. And I'm going to tell you right now, even if you're a person who doesn't do voices, who has a hard time getting into other characters, and personally, I've known game masters who are really good at doing voices, really good at making their NPCs stand out. I'm not always like that. I sometimes, like, the NPCs, especially NPCs I don't have plan for. Oh, there's another Zach there. You know what I mean? Like that gets rough. That being said, if you attach romance or love to a player character, even if it's a very mechanical thing, that player will find that character more important every time. I have never had a player not. Even if you're doing the same voice and you're just like, this is your character's girlfriend, or this character, you're very attracted to, or this character, you guys are in love with each other, or whatever, like, it immediately ingratiates them to that character and gives you a little bit more emotional content in your game that you don't always have. You know what I mean? Even if you can't really give that character like their own, like even cookie cutout, you tell somebody this is the character that your character is attached to romantically. That character is more important to them. It gives more weight to their decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets them inside of the head of that character more. It brings the emotion of the
Yeah.
character into your player's head.
Mm-hmm.
They can empathize with their own character a little bit more because they can always think about somebody they personally care about,
Mm-hmm.
and relate to their character and say, okay, this is how I would react. This is how I would feel if my love interest was threatened by a goblin or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're able to put themselves in that moment,
Yeah.
and make those decisions based off the emotions of their character, which is great. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
use. Romance and love is a great tool for
Yes.
storytelling. And if you're playing a real super gritty, hyper realistic soldier-esque game, you maybe don't need it. But if you're playing an adventure game, how many adventure movies do we know, or stories across the whole spectrum of entertainment, that have romance built
Yeah.
into it as a layer?
Yeah.
It's because it adds that depth and that emotional impact that really resonates, and which why it's so great to bring it into your game. And so, taking that into consideration, let's move a little deeper. What are
Okay.
different ways that you could introduce it to your game and to your players? And at that, session zero game, when you're explaining that you're going to have romance, what are the certain sort of names or language that you could use to make it very clear to your characters how this is approached? Like you hear the words lines and veils quite a bit. It's that classic fade to darkness moment in a movie, or that classic, they embraced, and then
Right.
the end of the
Right.
moment, and that's the moment. There's also a little bit more like interaction, like you meet the girl at the bar, what do you
Yes.
do, kind of
That's the
stuff.
tricky part. I think as a game master and a player, like if your character, like a lot of characters, 9 times out of 10 when you have love or romance, it's because the players have already built it in. You know what I mean? Like they've got a
Yeah,
dead person, or they've got a person at home, or they've got this person that they're trying to rescue, or whatever. It's already there in the character. The real tricky part is having a character fall in love with a character in the game, like throughout the course of the play. And I've always thought that's really interesting. It's also really interesting to approach too, because in real life, like everybody flirts different, but you're flirting with somebody other than me probably. So like you end up with this situation where like it's like it feels very unnatural. And I think that like the real trick is you have to remember at all times you're not talking to me, you're not talking to Wiz, you're not talking to the game master. Your character is talking to the guy or gal you're trying to get to know better in the game, you know.
exactly.
And that's one of the tricky things. You ever watch? You remember the line in the Truman Show? I don't know, back in the day where they were talking about when Truman does the nasty, and they're like, they never show it. They never show it. They always pan over to the window, the curtain blowing in the wind, or they fade out to a commercial, or that's a good rule of thumb for the game. I mean, you don't want it to get gross in there, depending.
Right.
The other thing is too, the game masters needs to remember that there are going to be some players who are really okay with it, and then other players who are not okay with it, and they're both playing at the same table. So you have to find that happy, and player B is going to feel real uncomfortable if you and player A start describing stuff. You know what I mean? Like player B
Right.
is going to be like, I don't want to be here anymore. So you got to respect all your players, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what that sort of veils and lines kind of
Yes.
really does, that pan out kind of moment.
I
You can set it
also,
up, and you can set that line
yes.
anywhere
Yeah.
that you discuss with your players. It could be, flirting at the bar is completely fine, but as
Right.
soon as you go home, that's done. Or, a romantic kiss is
Yeah.
completely fine. But maybe going a little bit beyond that, unless you're that kind of table and these people extremely well,
Yeah.
but that's your table, that's your space, that's your head. But typically, that romantic kiss is probably the best place to end that
Right.
line there. You don't
And
want to go
you
beyond that
kiss.
moment.
We move
Yeah.
on. I think that another thing when you're adding the characters romance, I think for another good rule of thumb for a game master when trying to do this is don't just speak about how hot they are. And this is the thing. There's one guy I know who game mastered, and he would always describe his female NPCs, and he would move his hands in front of his chest. Wiz can't see me, everybody. You guys can see me out there, but he would move his hand. He'd be like, like this, and that's how he would describe like all his females, his female NPCs. And I'm like, man, what are you doing? What are you doing? The other thing is too.
Yeah.
I don't know about other heterosexual men, but I can picture boobs all day. That's not gonna necessarily move the needle on me. And that was something that I decided a long time ago. Like, you can have the hot guy, the hot girl, but like your player is imagining stuff, right? So like
Right.
they're putting the face on the people that they want to have there. Like, unless you are a Tolkien level describer, the people's faces are whatever these people see in their head. They're not necessarily all uniform. Like, you're giving eye color, you're giving hair color, you're giving like notable scars, maybe like skin color and what they're wearing, right? Like, that's as far as the description really goes for all NPCs. If you really want like love to bloom at your table between PCs and NPCs, your focus should be on the character behind the NPC. Like,
And I'll add on that if you want. I 100% agree. Like, everybody has their own image in their minds of what all of these NPCs look like, and even the other characters, look like the other PCs look like. To expand and go a little bit deeper in there, I would say that develop a lexicon of non-verbal descriptors that are not breaking down the person's physical appearance, but rather their mode of communication of non-verbal cues. So, she has a sultry look. You don't have to go on and on about that, but like it's a nice way to express the individual's like attempt at flirting with your PC or vice versa. Zach, are we still there?
I'm here. Don't worry.
Okay.
I didn't hear anything of what you just said though, because I got a call from my work, and you were about to go
Oh,
on a rant. So I was like, I'm gonna let him rant and just answer this call real quick. So,
gotcha.
so I'm sorry
Should we,
about that.
should we pause for a moment?
Yeah. So I just I vanished for a second. I apologize.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
but what were you saying? I'm sorry.
So like the idea is that you dive into a character's, nonverbal communication, and use
Yes.
that language,
Yeah.
and develop that lexicon of descriptors as opposed to, their physical features, because like you said,
Yeah.
everybody's got their own idea.
Yeah.
But, she looks sultry, he looks smoldering,
Right.
he looks
Right.
smoldering at her,
Exactly.
or whatever.
You're attaching very simple descriptors to NPCs anyway, because you don't have time to describe like everything about them. You know what I mean? Like, that's why novels are big. So like, just give them a couple of traits and then make the character something that player would find interesting. That and if that player is good, that player's character would find interesting.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Now, like, so I've had like a pretty new-ish and weird experience with this.
Okay.
As we've talked about in the past, we are old school gamers back in
Yeah.
the 90s
Mm-hmm.
playing this. And back then, we only played with dudes. I at my tables, like for a very, very long
Yeah.
time, I only had guys playing, and it's because this was a very guy, and it was a different era then. It wasn't. I didn't want girls playing at my table. That would have
No.
been freaking awesome to
Yes, it
have
would have
girls
been
playing
great.
at my table. It was that I was a freaking nerd, and girls didn't touch me with a 10-foot
Yeah.
pole.
Yeah.
Um, so trying to get a girl in orbit around this stuff was
And
not going to happen.
part of me is glad girls did not join my game group, because I would have immediately fallen in love with them just because they were playing role playing games, and I was a child and unable to understand to chill out. So I'm very glad sometimes that I didn't have girls at my table. But
100%. Yeah.
even now, I only have, I think in my entire life, I've only game mastered like a handful of ladies. It just
So
hasn't come around.
here's where I was going with that. Like, this is kind of a newer experience to me, but like I have an in table that is nothing but girls.
Wow.
The entire I'm the only guy there right now.
Wow. That's
Um,
interesting.
it, it is a
Never
little bit
had
different.
that. Never had that.
And like it's just a little bit different, but I had noticed like several of the girls at that table and several girls that I play with love romance books. We'll chat about I love reading. I'm a big avid reader. I have read romance books. It's not really my genre.
Right.
Not bashing on the genre by any means. It's just I've noticed that I'm not the target audience. But these girls, some of them really love romance books. And one thing I've noticed in a lot of these romance books is that, the fade to black moments aren't that prevalent.
Right.
Typically. It's actually really more about the emotional connection
Yeah.
between characters. And that's what several of these girls actually look for when they're crafting these stories. And they are storytellers, let me tell you. These girls love romance books. They love these games because they love storytelling. They love diving deep into it. And so when my PCs will flirt with or my NPCs will flirt with these PCs, I know exactly what their head is doing. They're going back to those archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never done this at a table, you've done this with your war stories or your dungeon crawls. You go to archetypes sometimes. This is what you fall back on. They go to their archetypes in these romance stories and find the narrative flow there. If you haven't read a romance book, you don't need to have. If you read an adventure book, if you watched, any adventure style movie, you've seen the archetypal structure of various different types of romance stories, and you know how to like kind of put it into your story just from there just to introduce it, and then
Mm-hmm.
let the PC kind of play with it and just work out like more the interaction between these characters. How do they meet? What are their conflicts? What are they against? And why are they interested in each other? Just generally, um, these players that are interested in the female players at my table who are really interested in this, well, they will make it easy for you. um, they have very much like made out these characters that are very clear about what they are looking for in their romantic, interest. Um, and it's 100% narrative driven. It is
Mm.
not awkward. It is not weird. It is all about the heart and the romance and what this character would want. So
Right.
think about, the characters from the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Even like the romance in, Guardians of the Galaxy was fairly recently. You had a couple of characters that were, pretty big in there that had a tension, a romantic tension there. How did they develop that? It's a good thing to fall back on your archetypes when you're in that moment and figure out what type of character your PC is playing, what they want as far as that romantic relationship, and then
Right.
create the tension.
I mean, it seems serving in a little way, but remember, we're the whole point of this game is living fantasy. You know what I mean? And like, you want that, like, oh, these characters are now together, sort of thing. You know what I mean? So in some ways, you do kind of want to create the perfect match for the players when you're trying to bring it in. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that that character is going to be interested in this NPC if that's what you want. I liked it because I could kill him.
I mean,
And I inspired so much emotion from my players. I had an ongoing superhero game for a very long time. I killed so many girlfriends and wives and throughout the course of that, just because it inspires so much interesting situations. You know,
I mean, like, this is what I was kind of getting at was the start. You know, how to introduce it, because as a GM, once you have that romantic character established, that love story beginning, oh, that's a treasure trove of opportunities. Yeah. And yeah, tormenting your PC with a love interest death, you know, or potentially even better, a betrayal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, she's the supervillain now. Yeah. That's the best part. I think that the trick too for anybody out there is I know there's probably a lot of game masters who are like, I'm going to introduce a love interest so that they can do this. Don't do that. I think that what you should do is introduce the love interest and make them very, very much a part of that character's life. And that's when you twist the knife, so to speak. And that can be tricky too, because real love in real life is really the moments between the passionate embrace and the flowers. The real moments in life is like my wife broke a foot recently. I helped her up the stairs. Like that's you know what I mean? Like her letting me go to bed early because I'm tired and putting the kid to bed. That's the real love. You know what I mean? And you have to try and get that into your game. And obviously you're playing a fantasy game or like a shoot 'em up game or whatever. It's not going to be like, two people living in Ohio like me. But you need to find those moments. Like you need to make sure that you give moments of like them just eating around a campfire or them discussing an issue or something. You need to have it so that the player truly knows the quirks of the NPC, the fake NPC. And when you get to that level, that's when you murder them. You murder them with all your might, and it will destroy them forever.
Yes.
Forever.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a superhero game, like I said, and I would play this game usually one-on-one with each player with crossovers every so often. One of the players had this reporter that figured out he was a superhero in like the second issue. She decided to keep the secret. In exchange, he would give her all the scoops. He would do interviews with her, and he would call her when stuff is going down so she could be there first, that sort of thing. So she was just there. She has her own personality, her own character. She was just constantly around him, constantly reporting on him. That also led supervillains to kind of go after her. What was very interesting about this character is this character was prevalent through his entire storyline. We played that game probably over the course of like 3 to 5 years. So this character was just always there, just always kind of like an NPC. Eventually, his character fell in love with this character after many different dead girlfriends and dead other things. And then that character fell in love with him. And what was very interesting about this is at the end of this story, he had been playing for a really long time. He wanted to marry her. And she basically said, look, I've covered all of your stuff. I've covered it all. I've watched you lose girlfriend after girlfriend, wife after wife. And I'm willing to walk away from this as a reporter if you're willing to walk away as a superhero, and then we can be together. But I can't be another, like, victim for you. We've just spent too much time together. And he walked away. He retired the character. He retired the character because he believed truly that the character was that much in love with this character because they had been together through so much. That's the kind of thing that you want. You know what I mean? And I know that's not the twist the knife, so to speak, but at the same time, that's the kind of thing that you want.
That's the cowboy riding off with the girl
Yes.
at the end of the
Yeah,
movie. You know,
exactly.
that's what you want the good guy to get the girl at the end of the movie, you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's
Yep.
that moment. That's a great moment. And that's one thing that I think, it's interesting you mentioned comic books because that's one thing that comic books kind of fail at is that as a genre, they don't typically have endings.
Yeah.
Like every now and then you'll have a graphic novel that's separate, but like your superhero genres don't have endings.
It's my biggest problem
But
with comic
you're
books.
exactly. And your character and a TTRPG, sometimes they don't necessarily have great endings either, just like as far as quality. Um because schedules change, you lose track
Mhm.
of like all kinds of reasons why a game would end and doesn't end with a conclusion. But that's a conclusion. That's a fantastic conclusion.
Yeah.
Um and that's perfect. That is a perfect way to end a romantic arc and to end an arc of an entire story.
Yeah.
Um I absolutely love that. That's really great. There's so many things that this can do for you. Now, I would like to make one bit of advice to help uh develop that kind of like we're talking about romance here, not the fade to lines, not the like kissy face stuff, but the real romantic aspect of it, and to help enamor your PCs, your characters, and your players to an NPC
Hmm.
and start to develop that. And you actually kind of mentioned that a little bit. Make a request. And I don't mean like a side quest. It could be a side quest, but a request. If you're mentioned that NPC kind of got this deal where she would not expose his secret identity, but she would get all of the scoops. He would
Hmm.
help her out with all of these things. That's a great way to establish a relationship.
Yeah.
You know, if your NPC requests that the players start doing something on a regular, helping them out, or requests that they are allowed to journey with your NPCs and work for them in some way, be a part of the party. They don't have to be a class level adventurer, They could just be a cook or whatever. Anything would work. Look to your storyline, look to where your characters are at in the narrative,
Yeah.
and see if there's a way to insert an NPC who's attractive and who can make a request of your characters. And once that request is fulfilled, that character becomes enamored with
Yeah.
your players
Yeah.
and your player's character. And that's how the interaction starts.
Yeah.
Um,
Kind of
it works
force them
to
to be
kind of
around each other for a long time. I
it
think
does.
I think too you should kind of think about what kind of impact you want the partner to be on the storyline. You know what I mean? Like you take Nellis for example. He's got the kind of like future wife at home sort of situation that he's constantly. It's kind of a motivator for him to kind of get back to her and just run a farm, be done with all the space shooting stuff, and just get back to her and run a farm. And she becomes a very stabilizing influence for him because the rest of his life is chaos. So she is the rock. And once he told me the backstory and we started playing with him a little bit, I immediately knew that's what her character was going to be. It had to be like she had to be the anchor, so
Yeah.
that he has a port in the storm, so to speak. So like, even in my head, I've got demons in my head, and there's weird magic, and crazy religious racists and all sorts of stuff. He's got this wife that's just like not a wife, future wife, this girlfriend who's just an anchor, a port in the storm. Like, hey, you come here, things are normal for a while.
Yeah.
Whereas then you have the Carmen Magenta, who is the reporter from that character, who's much more like kind of instigating the situations in a lot of way, putting herself into the situation, being there, being around them. You have other characters who, are motivators to drive storyline or drive issues. So, like, I mean, you're still trying to craft a story. You know what I mean? It's not just
Yeah.
love for the sake of love. As much as I love for the sake of love, that's not what it is. You're trying to tell a story. How does that character fit into the story? How does that character influence the PC in order to create the story a little bit more?
Exactly. And to step on that a little bit further, just to give people like an opportunity to figure out how to create that in
Mm-hmm.
a myriad of different ways, I think conflict is one
Oh
of the
yeah,
best ways to do it between characters.
yeah.
You know what your character's PC want, what your players want. You know, where they want to go, what kind
Mm-hmm.
of person they are. They've talked, you played with them. You kind of get a feel for it. And then establish a love interest with a conflict to some aspect of their life. For instance, and this is tricky, but like you were talking about the anchor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That anchor character isn't going to necessarily have to have a very dramatic conflict, but the conflict could be leave your crap at work and you come home and you're nice with me. You
Yeah.
know, that's an easy conflict. You're an
Mm-hmm.
adventurer, you're a superhero, you're a space pirate,
Yeah.
whatever. Go do that at work. You come home, we're husband and wife at home,
Right.
or we're whatever at home. Um, that's an easy conflict to have with the spouse. And that kind of develops the story, the narrative. Now the PC has to make certain decisions that
Yeah.
you've placed in front of them. Do they have like these competing issues with their significant other? I have to go away for 16 months to
Right.
go save the universe.
Right.
Sorry, hun. Or do they, take them along with them? They have to make all these decisions, and that conflict instigates a myriad of opportunities that will organically form as long as you come up with something that the PC is going to ask of, or the NPC is going to ask of the PC that is conflicting with the PC's interest, what they're going for, what their goals are. It doesn't have to be big, but it just has to be like something that the PC now has to make a decision: do this
Right.
or do this.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's really easy to attach negative stimuli to PCs in villains, in bad guys, in just henchmen, in things happening to them. It is, but people forget that attaching positive, like positive things to your PCs also can influence what they do and say. And you have a character that's, you had talked earlier, like maybe you don't need a love interest in a super gritty soldier game or whatever. I agree completely with what you said. But at the same time, if you give one of that soldier like love to go back to at the end of the gritty, terrible mess, completely changes the story of that, completely changes the outcome of that, completely changes the outlook of that. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is very interesting to me.
That soldier with the picture of his girl, his best girl
Yes,
back
yeah,
home,
yeah,
and then he dies.
yeah, yeah. On
That
the other
that's a
side of the
soldier
world,
for a reason.
yeah, exactly. I think that like it can make the story more impactful. At the same time, it can also give your PCs a reason to make a different decision. It can be character development in a way. If you have, like you were talking about conflict, if you have a significant other that's an NPC or a character, and that significant other disagrees with your character, it might bring your character's faults in front. One of the things about being married to my wonderful wife for 13 years is the fact that every so often she disagrees with me in a big way. And we
What?
have, yeah, we have an argument, and then that forces me to go, because the thing is if you really love somebody, you trust them with all of your heart, and when they tell you something, you have to stop and go, wait a second, was I right about this? Like, because they're so positive I'm wrong, maybe I am wrong. And that's what's interesting about that when you get that kind of experience in a role-playing game, because those characters can still bring that to your character's attention. Like, hey, you can't kill these people because of X. And then that makes your character goes, well, I was just going to kill these people, but my partner says that's a bad idea. Maybe I shouldn't be killing these people, and stuff like that. It can change the opinion, and it can be a mechanism for real character development in your game. It's one of the reasons I like it so much when it's pulled off well, when you can get those romantic characters in there, just because it can really influence players in ways that they're not expecting. I mean, everybody sitting down at a table to play role-playing games, probably, depending on the game, but probably is expecting to fight bad guys. They're expecting to, save people. They're expecting to, do stuff like that, They're not necessarily expecting to have, like, a love interest and have that interest maybe tell them a different way to do stuff. They're not maybe expecting that. Which can really give them a sense of progression, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing that I think should be established fairly early on by the GM. If you're an experienced GM, you may not be doing this. I learned that this is super helpful for fun at my tables and to talk about this a lot with my players, and that is character progression. I love developing, as a player, my characters, and I love giving my players, as a GM, the opportunity to develop their characters. Right. And this is a great tool for that. Like you just said, they are the nitty gritty, like, hard guy. And now all of a sudden they got a girl who they're kind of getting enamored in, and they maybe need to figure out a different way of approaching this situation. That's progression. That's a tool for the story and the depth of the individual character to progress. And now the player is invested not just in the story that's going on, defeating the big bad, but also in the progression of their individual character. And they're looking for opportunities to progress that.
Yeah. How we react to love as people, let alone as characters, is different for all of us. But it also influences how we react to everything else. And I think that, like, having that force in there somewhere to react to is a good thing. I just do. I also think game masters should roll with it. Like, if players are constantly hitting on your NPCs or trying to get into them, give those NPCs characters. Don't just be like, it's another bar wench for so-and-so. Give that NPC a character. Don't be afraid to give that NPC a character and see if that NPC maybe strikes a chord in this character who's very obviously looking for love. Like, that's what he's sitting down with that character to do, or she.
If your character is kind of like a ladies' man kind of character, is running around, maybe one of these NPCs gets a little crazy.
Oh yeah. There are so many ways to use that kind of stuff. I had another game where I was playing. It was a one-on-one game, medieval fantasy setting. The character was a son of a rich womanizer, very Preston Howlett III sort of character. Wanted nothing to do with the business, but father wanted him to run the business because the only other child I had was a daughter, and the father was sexist. So his whole story... What?
I know this one.
Yes.
This is an app game, right?
Yeah. This is some of it's already on your thing. We haven't finished it yet, but one of the best parts of that game for me was I introduced a bad guy who was this evil pirate captain in the first arc. There was 3 arcs, named Dufries, and she was just horrible, evil character who was at odds with the main character the entire time. She ends up kind of dying at the end of the first arc. When I sat down to write the second arc, I immediately was like, she's coming back, but she is bound to Titus for some reason, which was the main character, the womanizer. And the womanizer, so what ended up happening was it was this magical MacGuffin that basically she can't die anymore, but she's bound to Titus. She dies when he dies because of this weird spell that they were both a part of. But she hates him. But she has to keep him alive to stay alive. So she ends up coming back. They end up kind of like... It becomes this buddy cop story almost for the whole second part, where we get to know her a lot and the reason that she's a terrible person, which I had a lot of fun doing because it was like, oh, now I see why she's awful. Like, it doesn't give her an excuse, but I could see all the terrible things because the bad guy in that was the reason she was bad, right? So Then the third one was all about the love story between DeFreeze and Titus, because they started to actually fall for each other, even though they hated each other through the entirety of the first two. And I loved that. It was like my favorite part about that three arc is just this like twist of like the main bad guy of the first one and the main good guy by the end of the third one are basically together, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is a great example of developing the character across the board and giving it basically turning the entire story on its head. That gives depth to your story, and your players are going to remember that development from like, oh, she's evil to where it ends up going. You know.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic example of how to utilize some of these tools that we've been talking about. Now, before we wrap this up today, Zach, one last topic I really wanted to pick your brain about here is what have you struggled with or are currently struggling with in the topic of this romance at the game table? Is there anything that just like you don't feel like? I have a couple. I don't know if you've gotten there, but there's a couple of things where I know I have room to improve, let's say.
I don't know. I don't want to be super arrogant or egotistical. I am a very imperfect fellow, and I think anybody who gets to know me for any period of time will understand that. That being said, I think I'm pretty good on this topic, just given my history. I will say I probably should talk to my players a little bit more before I start. There's definitely been some moments in my past where, like, I push it a little too far, not realizing who I'm playing with, and they have to be like, "Hey, I don't want to flirt with you," you know, or something like that. And that always makes me feel, because it takes everybody out of the game. It makes me feel like I should have known that you didn't want to do that. Maybe I should step back a little bit, you know.
Sure.
And maybe I should have talked to you before I even did that. So maybe the communication I could stand, even though I preached at the beginning, I could stand to get a little bit better. I think the other thing that probably, if I need any improvement on, would be to not transpose my own experiences wholeheartedly on the characters. You know, especially like my one mage character. I built him to be kind of like me, but I didn't necessarily want him to be married. Not because I don't want to be married, I love being married, but just because I wanted him to be kind of like an old man with no NPCs, kind of the only, like, if he was me and he was married and happy, he wouldn't do magic, you know what I mean? Because he'd be married
Right,
and
yeah.
happy. So, like, I was like, okay, well, I'll have him. My mechanism for him was that his wife, who he very much loved, dies of cancer, and he could have saved her with magic. So he starts to mess with magic, kind of almost like a I should have been doing this because I could have stopped it sort of thing. That caused me to have very emotional moments at the table that I was not expecting, because I made him too much like me. So in turn, I immediately made his wife too much like my wife. So I'm immediately playing me with my wife dead, which right off the bat is way darker than I want to ever mess with. But then it definitely caused a lot of moments because the game master ran with it in a way I wasn't expecting, and he made her kind of like vindictive spirit a ghost in my house, like her cancer was like a ghost of my house. So it caused a lot of things for me emotionally that I wasn't expecting. And I think if maybe I had maybe not transposed my life over this character's life, I probably would have been able to deal with that a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good cautionary tale that
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard discussed very much. But that's a good.
No, I've definitely mentioned Zeke before on this, or Ziggy. I can't remember if it was
Yeah.
Zeke or Ziggy, but the my mage from World of Darkness. There have definitely been moments where one of his big finales was he had to go into the Umbra with this werewolf and fight his wife's cancer, basically this cancer ghost of his wife, which was horrifying
Yeah.
for me as a person to deal with that. so like there was this like this amount of emotions that I had, and I'm a very emotional person. I just am. Like my emotions are always right about to come out. It's taken me 43 years to kind of control them better. So like I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that makes me perfect for role playing games, just because I'm ready to experience them. But this was like I don't know. It definitely took away from the experience quite a bit, because I'm like, oh my god, this is my wife who's dead, and I'm
Right.
dealing with that. Like I shouldn't
Yeah.
have done this. You know, like
I definitely that's a good like I said, like I think that's a good cautionary tale. And what I mean is like I don't think like I haven't heard a lot of people like discuss putting their story either as a GM or in your situation as a player too close to home.
yeah,
You know, when they're
yeah.
writing this PC up or their backstory or the narrative and it coming back to haunt them. But that is a good one. That's a good like, you know, it be a little like self-reflective before maybe you dive into this.
Well, and when I
I
did
haven't
the
thought about that,
superhero
but that's a
game,
good one.
everybody was based off themselves. We were younger and stupider then, so everybody was based off themselves. So that meant when I was killing people, I was killing people they knew, you know, and that could sometimes cause some problems, you know.
Right, yeah.
So yeah. Well, what do
See,
you think you could do better in this area?
um, in my experience, the thing that there's a couple of areas that I have struggled with, as a GM, I'm still trying to improve upon. Um, the one pertaining to romance is the femme fatale.
Mm,
Um, I have mechanical ideas in my head as to what a femme fatale should be, and execution on that doesn't work for me. Like, it's easier for me to create a femme fatale if she doesn't come off as the archetype right off the bat, and she just
right.
seems like a romantic interest that stabs him in the back later or has diverging interests later. But if I'm walking in like the classic, you know, gumshoe detective movie kind of femme fatale, where she's very clearly a femme fatale. She's beautiful, she's smart, confident, and she wants something of the PC.
Yeah. A little bit
Balancing that
sociopathic.
a little bit sociopathic, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, I know what I'm getting into, but well, for the PC, for the character, the main character, I know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm getting into, but I just can't resist anyways. Baiting that in, making that character, making her actually like desirable, and not just overdoing it. There's a fine line there that I haven't personally been able to really dial in.
That's a hard one, man. Honestly,
It
I
is.
I could write a femme fatale. I wrote some short stories with one, but I playing one is very difficult, because the other thing is too, you don't want them to look like sex pots. You know what I mean? Because that's not what they
Right.
are. They're using it as a weapon, but they only use it as a weapon when they can't use their brain as a weapon. You know, so like
Or a
it's
weapon as a weapon.
or a weapon as a that's true. So it's a real tricky line to ride, for a game master, you know, who just doesn't have any experience in that area. I think that like it's a real fine line
The
to
closest that
ride.
I've been able to get with accomplishing it is very short moments, as opposed to writing it out as a major character.
Yeah.
So a very flirty PC, that's obviously like maybe she's a barmaid, maybe you know she has like she's a tiefling or something, and you're just like kind of hamming it up for the trope aspect of it. Um, and then at the last minute she steals your character's money. She does something that
Yeah.
spends it. It's going to be very quick turnaround. It's not a drawn out one. It doesn't establish the character as a true femme fatale because it doesn't um play into it for a long-term storyline.
Right.
That is something that I've been close enough to get to. I'm now trying to figure out a way of bridging that gap between that instantaneous backstab to a long-term femme fatale
Right.
arc that
Right.
my characters can get into and have conflict with.
Right. It's tricky. It's real tricky. Um, I think I have a few of them in the Titus game. Actually, if we ever get around to finishing the writing and narration of that. But like it's real tricky. I think the biggest thing that you need to do is just make them seem like they're friends until
Right.
they're suddenly not their friends. But that's even tricky. Like it's a tricky character arc to play. It just is.
It is.
Honestly, I have a hard time with any bad guy surviving the first encounter as they're a bad guy. You know,
That's
so
right.
like it's like the minute my characters are gonna figure out that who X person is a femme fatale, they're gonna just shoot her, and then it's gonna be a problem because all the femme fatale, like, okay, that initial femme fatale was pretty good, but she's dead now, so I can't do anything with that because my characters always kill my bad guys in the first instant chance they get. So I don't know. I don't know what to
Yeah.
tell you on that one. It's a difficult one.
It's a different one, and maybe that's a topic for a future episode
Yeah,
if we ever
maybe.
get this figured out.
Yeah,
This might be something where we have a part two.
yeah,
Maybe
I'd
in a
love to
year.
revisit it. Definitely.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. Well, Zach, any final thoughts before we step out for today?
Communication, but definitely use it. It's a great tool for a game master. Don't feel obligated to use it though. Like if you don't feel confident with it or you don't feel comfortable with it, don't do it. It's not a big deal, but it is it is very useful in my opinion. And just make sure that you know your players.
Um, I 100% agree. I think my final thought is if you are interested in it, but you're a little new to it, obviously communication, we hammered that pretty hard.
Yeah, we
But
did.
if you don't know how to start, there's a great thing that I do for all aspects of RPGs, and I think it's very effective here. Go back to your archetypes, go back to your movies, go back to your books, go back to things that you've seen in literature or entertainment that you think works for this sort of romantic arc. Figure out how that would work with your characters, with your NPCs. Maybe talk to your characters and see, generally where their ideas are with certain things, and go from there. It's a good tool to think about in the moment when your love interest character that you're trying to establish in there is needing to make a decision, needing to make an action. You don't know exactly what they do. What would this type of character do in the movie you once saw or the book you once read? It's a tool to get you going, and once you start using it regularly, you'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable and be able to play around and start utilizing a little bit more advanced tools, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've covered everything there is to know about love today. Um, I think I'm hoping that everybody out there is going to have a great Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's is dropping on Valentine's Day. I hope that your games and all the romance that you guys have in your games goes great. Before we sign out, Zach, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Not really. We're still trying to figure stuff out here. You can check out my gaming podcast when we get to it. That's every Wednesday on YouTube, Tuesday on Spotify, and then check this out whenever you can. We're bi-weekly right now, and eventually we'll start getting stuff going again.
Yeah, and for everybody out there, this is Wizard Respite Sanctorum. Like Zach said, we're bi-weekly. We will drop every other week. This is dropping on YouTube, at Old Man Gaming YouTube channel, and we also are dropping on the Wizard's Respite. So check it out there.
You can also get us on Spotify.
And Spotify,
We're everywhere.
even other podcasting platforms. I listen to this on Podcast Addict. So check it out. Check out the various ways to get at it. Listen to your podcast. Watch the episodes. Wizardsrespite.com. You can check all of these out. Our back catalog. You can also look at. We have T-shirts. We have articles. Go wild. That we got. It's a website dedicated to all things TTRPG. Everybody out there, thank you for listening. Have a happy Valentine's Day, and until next time, keep rolling them dice.